Good morning and welcome to the New Media Show. My name is Todd Cochran. Very early here in Honolulu and relatively early in Seattle. Good morning, Rob. How are you?
Doing great, Todd. It is like, yeah, we're right on the cusp of a change to daylight savings time.
Oh,
So that's
oh, that
coming up tomorrow.
let's see here. That's true. So is that going to change? Let's see here. Do I have to? Oh, guess what? I get to sleep in an hour starting
Pretty
next
awesome.
week. Yeah, beautiful. It'll only be 2 hours difference. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm going to experience daylight savings time at 35,000 feet.
Oh, boy, you're doing a lot of traveling and flying these days.
Yeah, my body doesn't know if I'm coming or going, but
I
Sunday,
would imagine.
yeah, my office looks like it too. But yeah, Sunday night I fly out to Denver. So if anybody is in the listening audience that lives in the Denver area, we're already meeting a few podcasters on Tuesday. Going to go out for dinner. We're going to not watch the election. So uh,
You're not going to watch the election. We're going to bail on that one, huh?
yeah, it's gonna be yeah. Well, never mind. But anyway, so if you're in the Denver area, I'm gonna be in first time in Denver. Really, I drove through Denver, but I'm gonna be in Centennial. That's where I'm staying. Is a hotel. There's a tech park there, so I'm gonna be in that area. So it should be fun. But anyway, I'll let you guys. If anybody's in the audience is in the Denver area and you want to come hang out, let me know. It doesn't have to be Tuesday, but that's kind of the planned day. Because Monday and Thursday, well, there'll be shows, and I fly out Friday morning. But how about you, Rob? You're getting ready to go to Italy here soon, yeah?
Yeah, at the end of the month, on the 26th of the month, I fly out for a team retreat in Italy, and so it should be interesting. I'm hoping that there's no earthquake. So
Oh, so you're gonna have Turkey Day, you're gonna have Black Friday, then you're leaving Saturday. So you're a brave man to allow, you're gonna go out and your wife's gonna have a full shopping weekend ahead of her.
oh yeah, yeah.
So,
Oh
well,
yeah,
let's
yeah. It's amazing. We're totally into the winter cycle here. I know it doesn't make a huge impact on where you live, but it's a
it,
big change
it
here.
it does when I
Yeah.
have to pack because I have to remember, oh, I need to take a coat.
Oh
So,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
But it's can you believe it's November already? It's just like
I know. It's yeah.
it's like
Oh well.
I got like 10 things I haven't gotten done yet this year. So, anyway,
Yeah.
everyone,
Well, and CES is coming up real soon,
yeah.
and I know the Podfest Orlando is coming up soon too
Yeah.
in February. So things are coming around a lot faster than I think we realize. So
Yeah. It's moving quick.
yeah,
And I haven't even really done any planning for CES yet. Well, I've done some, but not a lot. But
it's probably not going to take as much planning for you,
yeah,
right?
it's probably not. The emails have already started, but I'm ignoring them. Hey, just as a side note, a little self promotion here. Today at 2 p.m. Eastern, Mike Dell is going to be having a webinar. So if you're a PowerPress newbie and you want to get deep into the weeds in PowerPress, Mike's going to be doing a webinar today at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can find a link to that webinar at Geek News on Twitter if you want to check that out. And I think he's got like 30 people signed up, so it should be a pretty big webinar, but we'll see how many show up.
Well, and also the DC Podfest is going on today, back in Washington D.C. This is the final day for the event, and you can actually listen to some of that. Rob Walsh was back there and gave a presentations about debunking a lot of the podcast myths out there, and it's actually available on a live stream, or actually it's on demand, just by going to the website. Spreaker is actually live streaming a lot of the event this year. So if you wanted to hear Rob talk about all the podcast myths out there, go check out that. It's always an entertaining talk that he gives about that.
Yeah, and he,
And
he that's his typical stump speech when he goes to an event. He likes giving that one a lot.
yeah, well, I think he has so much fun with it. I think he.
I saw him about throw someone out of a group room the other day talking about new and noteworthy. That topic poked its head up again, and And he must have a search term set for new and noteworthy because he was in like 30 seconds later and chopped the guy's head off. So, um,
He probably does. Yeah, so I should invite him to come on this show, and between the three of us, we could have a real curmudgeon fest.
well, it's yeah, and we have to be careful, Rob, that we don't become curmudgeons. That's not necessary.
I think we already are.
Hey, so this week was and I had to be. I don't want to betray any confidences at all, but I had a client that we were working with this week that is, having some, I guess for better words, having some thoughts about their podcast feed, and we consulted with them and talked with them, and there's a lot of services out there today that are saying if you move here, you shall move your podcast feed over to us, and I think we talked them off the edge, but I continue to be a big purveyor right now, and this is nothing new. For 12 years, I have, you know, really pounded this bandwagon that your feed's a very, very important intellectual property, and you should do your best to try to maintain it on your .com if that's the if that's what you where you're hosting your website, where you have your website. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, it
Well, I
just
mean,
goes
Todd,
to
it's really all about just being somewhere where you know that you're really in control of that. And I mean, a lot of hosting platforms don't really give you all the controls that you need
no, no, no.
to transfer and do redirects and things like that.
I
And
think the majority of folks do,
yeah, I
you
would say
know.
so too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's a few still out there that don't, and and actually, one of those particular companies came up this week with folks that we migrated off. We just told them, sorry, you can't, or they won't, and they found out the hard way. So
Yeah, and Todd, I also heard you talk about on Facebook too about a company that was using the same file name
yeah.
across all their shows. I thought
Oh.
that was odd.
So, and you just have to kind of look around. I'm not going to say the company's name, but we had a customer that came in, wanted to be migrated, and when the system migrated them just fine. Moved, it was not very many files, maybe 40, and so only 40 episodes. So they were early in their podcast, um, creation. But when we looked in the system, it was one file, and we're like, where's the other 46? Well, the way our system's set up is we allow people to overwrite essentially their media file name and not count against their quota. So if you recorded episode 3 weeks ago and you put an ad in it, and now you want to replace that ad with another one and you want to replace that file, so long as that file doesn't change in size dramatically, we let you re-upload it. Well, in this instance, the situation was we said, oh, replacement file, replacement file, replacement file, because it was all named like podcast show .mp3. It was I mean, they were all named exactly the same thing, and so so we said that's weird, and we went and started looking at some of their other customers. So essentially, this company has every show on its platform using the same exact audio file name for each and every episode.
So Todd, I didn't actually look at this, but are they doing a unique ID number in a like a slash area just prior to that address so they can create a unique
I-
reference point?
In their system, they have it looks to me like they have each file has its own directory or something to that effect, which is really,
Oh,
that's how
okay.
they, it's their company name dot show dot, I mean, slash, episode one slash podcast dot mp3 slash episode,
Okay.
so, they really, that's going to be from that number two. We already know that doesn't scale. you know,
Yeah, well, it's true. You can't have an unlimited amount of shows under that situation. But and I believe that the company we're referring to does a lot of dynamic ad insertion.
Yes, they do.
So they probably are doing that for that reason, I'm sure.
Well, none of the other dynamic inserters are doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to do
Don't
that, but
have to,
like
right?
I could see an engineer architecting it to be
Right.
easier that way.
Yeah, it saves them like 10 lines of code. So,
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
so we had to go in and write. We just basically had to go in and write, and we had to write like 10 lines of code to account for it, and we essentially renamed the files. It's really dumb to have those files all named the same thing. It's from an SEO standpoint. It's just there's a whole bunch of stuff. Some older players will choke on that. Um,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, it sounds like it's just kind of lazy programming somewhat. That's what it sounds like to me. And somebody that doesn't really understand the podcasting space and how things should work.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so we see stuff going on all the time because companies don't like it when we come in and just, when people move, we've been we've been blocked before. We've had our IPs blocked. So we've had to use proxy servers to be able to migrate people. I'm just like, really? If the customer's leaving you, they're leaving. We have people leave. It's not like we don't lose people. Every company loses people from time to time. People's needs change, and you don't like to see them go, but you don't try to hold them back when they go, So it's just the scheme of things. But yeah, I had one of the companies try to actually blocked us from trying to move someone. Well, that didn't work very long.
Todd, did you hear or see this article that's come out? And I've heard Jordan Harbinger, I can never pronounce his last name, the founder and host of the Art of Charm podcast.
I know Jordan's been on this show.
Yeah, he has. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
He actually has been out there saying that, please, please, for the love of God, do not start a podcast. Did you see this article?
I did, and I took umbrage to it.
Yeah. I mean, I can see his point, but there's a big but behind this.
Okay, so you're telling people don't start a podcast. Why? It's everyone has a voice. Everyone should be allowed to have a voice.
Yeah.
But not even allowed. It's a right.
Yeah. That's right.
And
It's a level playing field. It's an open marketplace. Anybody can do it. I think what he was talking about is mainly if you're going to start a podcast, put some thought into
right.
it and make it unique, make it interesting, do your best work with it, not just make it a copycat of a million other shows.
But right? It's hard because there's 26,000 religious shows. There's 22,000 sports shows. It's very, very difficult to have a show that is purely unique. But the way I look at tech podcasts, when we started tech podcasts, we were worried that there was 4 or 5 of us that were doing new shows, and we're like, oh, this is gonna be a problem, and so really it wasn't, because in the end there was like 20 new shows, 15 review shows. There was just this huge mix of, and there still is today, and there's a little something there for everything. But what we found, and here's the really the delta, and this is where people creating new shows should really look at, is if you're not networking with someone, if you're not networking, something motivated you to do a show. And if it was a show that motivated you to do a show, then, do your best to, if cross promote that show that you liked a lot in your own show, and then hopefully, let them know that you did, and they can cross promote back. I never asked someone to promote my show. I always promoted someone's show, then told them that I promoted their show, and hopefully they promoted it back.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure what the answer is to Jordan's comments here, to tell people, other than I guess he's just trying to encourage people to make as good a content as they can, and if they don't feel like that they can, Um, they don't necessarily have to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's kind of it comes across as a little bit of a negative message,
Yeah. Me too.
and I don't know that people that we want to be putting that out there is stop trying. If if you think you're not going to be good at this, I think it's a little bit of an elitist approach, and I'm not
Hmm.
sure that that actually is constructive.
You know, and
Um,
and 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 I keep and I think that point I've hammered, and you have too, Rob. This hammered this point home. It's not the sprint; it's the marathon with podcasting, and you
yeah,
know,
and you're going to get better at doing it.
and it's going
You
to
know,
take a couple of years. You know,
yeah,
this is not. Sure, there's going to be shows that have instant success, but
yeah,
for the average person starting a show, they got to hammer. I look at my God, listen to my episode number, 3, 4, 5, 10. Oh wow, it's
yeah,
you don't even find your battle rhythm until you hit like episode 50. You and I been doing this show long enough. We don't even talk about this show. You just show up and we go.
yeah.
We've been doing this show long enough. We've got a battle rhythm and we know how it rolls. Is it perfectly? It's perfectly set up and planned. No, it's not. Like
Mm-hmm.
this morning, we're going to have a guest come in here in hopefully about 11 minutes, and we're going to talk about low power FM, which
Mm-hmm.
is an interesting topic for anyone that's out there doing a podcast, and we're going to find out what's going on in that space. So, we haven't pre-planned questions or anything with the guest that's coming on. So, I really think that doing a podcast today, I do agree that you should plan a little bit, and you should say, okay, can I do 2 years worth of content on the topic I have picked?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask yourself. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I I have that issue too. Even the show that I do, the Speaker Live Show, being focused specifically on podcasting. I know you talked to like a Daniel J. Lewis or a Dave Jackson, and they've been doing regular shows on podcasting for a very long time, and I'm sure they'll probably have a different answer to this as well. That you just kind of have to be creative. You have to be thoughtful about what people are interested in out there in a very niche, narrow topic like podcasting. Talking about podcasting, like on this show, you kind of have to be open to thinking about the psychology of podcasting and thinking about different ways of looking at it that can be helpful to people as they do a show, just based on our own experience. I know, Todd, that's kind of what we approach this show, is that it comes from 10, 12, 15 years of doing this kind of stuff and pointing out different things that are going on in the space, or different individuals that are bringing different thoughts and trying to pull them apart and draw some clarity to them. And that's really the purpose of this show. So I I it's a difficult thing. It's not easy to do, and I think that um, the more time you do it, the more chances that you get is to in refining that process. And I do still keep coming up with speaker live shows every week. Each show is um, probably not always the best or better than the last one, but I think I have developed a rhythm over time, and I've kind of learned. Even a longtime podcaster like you and I, I'm sure you had some struggles doing your Legends of Podcasting show that you just started too, and that you probably went through a similar process. Is that accurate, or was that really smooth for you?
Well, it was smooth in that I'm talking to people right now that I know. Today, I'm talking to someone that don't have a lot of history with.
Yeah,
And my biggest challenge with Legends of Podcasting is booking. I've never had to book people before, and it sucks, trying to get people on. So that's my challenge with Legends of Podcasting. But and I think shows too are such that I was talking to someone that listens to this show religiously, and I say, "What, you know, are we boring you?" And oh no 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 no, I said sometimes the individual said sometimes you guys may get off on a little tangent, but you know invariably somewhere during the show there'll be like this ding moment where I tell everyone you need to listen to 22 minutes and 33 seconds. You need to listen to, the 5 minutes following that. So, I go, oh, and it's true because sometimes you and I will chit chat about stuff and then we'll get on a topic and we'll get down in the weeds deep and there'll be something there that is really pertinent. And it may took us 22 minutes to get there, but um,
It's a story. That's
yeah,
right.
and you
Yeah.
can't always hit a home run on a show. You can't. And there are days I get done doing my tech show and I'm like, man, that one sucked. But guess what? It's got to go out. Or the news was thin, and you're like, man, what do I really, what's my lead off? Where's my rant topic? Soapbox topic. There's just sometimes it's tough because I'm dependent upon the news cycle. But
Yep.
this show too, kind of as well. We're watching what's going on in space, seeing people making announcements. Gimlet just made one the other day that their newest show that they launched, and I don't even know the name of it, did 300,000 listens like off the get go, and someone in Google Plus was questioning that. Is that even possible? And the old measurement thing came up again. But if you look at their mode operandi over there, they are like you cross promote. There is no such thing as not that is Mando. Every show
Mm-hmm.
over there promotes two or three other shows every
Mm-hmm.
single episode, and that's smart. So it goes
Yeah.
again back to the network thing. But
But I think that there's different types of networks, and I know that this is going to take us down a little bit of a tangent here, but some networks can cross promote, others struggle at it. I mean, if you're a network of shows that are solely owned by the network and produced by the network, I think doing cross promotion is pretty simple and easy to do. But um, if you're a kind of a loosely aligned podcast network, which a fair amount of the networks out there are, it's harder to do that because podcasters are much more competitive with each other. And I know, Todd, you've put forth a lot of effort over the years to do cross promotion type activities with podcasters, and it hasn't always worked out very well, has it?
no, and actually we ran Trucker Tom let us use a domain for many years, and I think he still owes it. It was called Podcast Promos. It was a site dedicated to cross promotion and getting people to cross promote shows because I understood the value of it. There in the very very early days, when we were starting to see not just where well, literally hundreds of shows coming on a week, or maybe 1,000 shows. Because in the early days, man, it was, I mean, shows just exploded, and it's probably it's similar to today's kind of trajectory on new shows coming online. If you're not cross promoting, you're not going to get found. Um, and what we found, at least over at Tech Podcasts, was that sure we may lose a listener here or there, but oftentimes people would listen to both shows. So it was a win-win, not a win-loss. Um, and sometimes people found a show that better suited them, and vice versa. So the cross promotion stuff, people don't do it these days. They should. They should do more of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's the power of being in a closely aligned network. Um, you look at, I hate to say, but like a podcast one. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like a religious thing that they do down there
Yep.
as well. All the shows at various times get cross promoted on other shows and on radio shows, and it's really all about just getting the word out and
Yep.
inspiring some word of mouth marketing, because let's just say it like it is. I mean, word of mouth marketing is the key to this
Oh,
space.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've been on a kick right now with my Geek New Center show, asking my listeners to do a specific function to try to help me with Google. I've been asking them if you will please use this link when you are tweeting the show or talking about things that are going on, specifically my sponsor.
Yeah.
I'm trying to use the crowd to influence, some page rank and
Yep.
do it through social media and not make it look spammy. And
Yeah.
that, in doing that kind of stuff is getting the audience engaged to do that. But I don't know. I just went totally left field there. But um, yeah, the whole promotion thing is huge. And not only promoting, but also linking to a show from your show, not just talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, has there been any kind of more fallout or feedback on the whole This American Life sample player thing that came
I've
out?
heard not.
Have you heard anything more on that?
I've heard nothing about it. I did hear about
Okay.
a new. I don't know if it's the same tool. Maybe it is. otranscribe.com.
Oh.
Um, and no, I don't want to be subscribed to your mailing list.
Yeah, I did actually hear Rob Walsh on the feed kind of go off on those guys, kind of like what we did too.
Oh,
the the whole thing about it's um, that that the that the This American Life folks were claiming it as something that was revolutionary in the podcasting space,
well,
and
I
this this is a first, and it's all open source and all this kind of stuff, and
well,
it
I
just
I appreciate they
yeah
made it open source.
yeah. But as you could tell, it really doesn't perform very well. It's really slow.
Well, it's just like another revolutionary thing that Omni announced, and boy, they're big. They love to write a bullshit headline. They are revolutionary in creating custom sample RSS feeds. In other words,
Oh
this
yeah, I
this is
saw
an
that.
RSS
Yeah.
feed that has multiple shows in it. I'm thinking to myself,
Wow.
I think I've got a trademark on a product called MyCast that allows you to have a custom RSS feed with multiple shows in it since what was that, about 10 years ago? Okay, so it's not.
Spreaker has had that in every account that's been given since for the last 5 years.
Right. So this is nothing revolutionary. So, and they're promoting it as a way to get a sample of a show. So,
Yep.
okay, so a sample means give me just 5 minutes of the show, not the whole show. So, I'm just, and reporters are gullible. I mean,
Yeah.
they're like, uh, did you know that's like not new?
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, that's been around a while. Matter of
Yeah.
fact,
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, Todd. Sabrina sent a contact request. I just got an email about it, so we might want to accept that and see if we can pull Sabrina in. So we have a guest coming on, and her name is Sabrina Roach, and she's with a company called Brown Paper Tickets up here in Seattle, and she's been heavily involved in the low power FM community and trying to drive the movement in that space of thousands of low power FM stations starting up all over the country.
I hope.
And she's going to come in here and talk a little bit about how those low power FM stations are starting to move more towards podcasting. And what's really interesting about this is that there is going to be a movement towards more localized content coming out of these stations, since that's kind of their mandate with the FCC is that they have to produce local content. And I believe a lot of these stations are going to want to put that out as podcasts. Um, I mean, a lot of them are music stations as well, but so she's going to be joining us pretty quickly here
She,
from Seattle.
she
So,
is approved and can come in at any time.
okay. Sabrina, come on in.
Hi there. How you doing?
Hi, Sabrina.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on board and joining us to talk about low power FM stuff. It's
Thanks for having
we're
me.
both really curious about that, and I think we definitely want to share it with our podcaster community and kind of get a connection going between low power FM and podcasting more.
Thank you so much. The podcasting world that you're part of, that I've seen from watching your show, is just not something I'm very familiar with, and I don't know many folks in the grassroots low power FM movement who do know a lot about it.
Okay.
So I'm
Well,
very excited to learn.
yeah. So let's start from ground zero here, right?
Yeah.
And yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Low Power FM community and what's been going on there and how big it is and what you see happening around. I mean, a lot of those stations are live streaming, I believe, and plus they're on terrestrial as well. But if you could give us kind of like a landscape view of what's happening in that space.
Sure. Roughly, well, almost 3,000 groups, so like 2,800 nonprofits applied for these licenses in 2013. And at this point, let's see, about 750 are on the air. And there's a potential for there to be roughly 1,500 of them around the country. And when I say nonprofit, that's a mix, ranging from schools, tribal governments, faith-based organizations, and arts nonprofits, and even farm worker unions.
Mm-hmm.
So what I guess going back a little bit further, so I think a lot of people don't even know what low power FM is, how it's allowed, what are the rules? Do you know that type of information or how that
Well,
actually?
sure. That's a big bucket of information.
Yeah, I know it is.
So let's tease out parts of it. So from a technical standpoint, you can imagine low power FM to be like legalized pirate radio.
Awesome.
So getting more into the nitty gritty, they broadcast at 100 watts, and that can go 3 to 10 miles depending on your topography.
Okay.
I need to have that type of a power out of my house here. I could reach all of Honolulu.
Yes.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
So then, go ahead.
Oh, go. Yeah, I was just gonna. So, what does it usually take a nonprofit or a group to get a low power FM station going? What's involved?
What's involved? Building a nonprofit from the ground up if you weren't part of another organization initially. So that organizational development component is huge. And then when it comes to the technical aspects, it can take, well, let's see. I asked some engineers to put together an equipment list and come up with some rough estimates on what it would cost for a group to get on the air, and that's roughly $60,000 when you're looking at your antenna and transmitter and then the studio equipment. But these groups, when it comes to the bureaucratic standpoint, they applied in 2013. And once they were awarded what's called a construction permit by the Federal Communications Commission, they then had 18 months to build, to prove to the FCC that they could get on the air. And then these groups are eligible for an additional 18-month extension. So essentially 3 years for a group to pull together $60,000 to get on the air. That would be like a really rough sketch of what that could look like.
And if you look at a lot of markets today here in Honolulu, I mean they're stacked on top of one another from an FM standpoint. So, where are they dropping these low power FM stations on the dial? Is it all over the map, or where do they drop them at?
Sure. Well, in the early 2000s, there was a wave of an application window for groups to get on the air in more rural areas. And then the Local Community Radio Act took roughly a decade for media justice activists to push through Congress and President Obama signed it into law in 2011. So then there were negotiations with the FCC to get to basically shoehorn these frequencies in between established FM dials in urban areas. This filing window made it possible for stations to get what's called a second adjacent waiver. And without diving too deep into the radio dial, basically in cities like Seattle, we had 8 places on the dial roughly where you could shoehorn in these frequencies.
That's cool.
And so it takes some engineering, but there are a bunch of engineers who've helped make it work. And some corporate broadcasters did challenge these applicants.
Of course.
But, it just takes good engineering.
So do the groups that are applying for these low power FM licenses, do they have to be nonprofit, or can they be for-profit businesses?
Nope, they have to be nonprofit organizations. But they can sell underwriting. Their business model is a lot like a public radio station, like a full power NPR member station or a full power community radio station. But there is a slight difference when it comes to that business model, because instead of a numbers sell on underwriting, you would probably go with like the halo effect of being associated with a community-based organization. So some of these groups I think of like neighborhood arts and culture organizations that just happen to also have the ability to be useful in an emergency situation. And, their facilities are just different from most arts nonprofits. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I was just, do the stations have to lower their power at night or anything like that? Can they be broadcasting 24/7, or is there like a turnoff time period?
Yeah, 24/7.
24/7? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So if you look at this, Rob, I think the technical, if you have the place to put it, the technical part is pretty straightforward. But for me at least, I would think that the nonprofit stuff is going to be the biggest pain in the butt, because it takes forever to get any organization a nonprofit status. How long is it? Are you seeing huge delays in that, or?
Well, really the biggest pain seems to be city building permits.
Oh.
So here in Seattle, we're experiencing tremendous growth. So because there are so many entities applying for building permits, it takes like 10 weeks to get a certain kind of meeting. And then you make a little bit of progress, and then that goes through another 10-week process. And then those fees are quite expensive. So we've been working with city government here to lower those barriers. But that seems to be one of the trickiest parts. And then some cities don't have that issue. One of the low power FMs I'm working with here, they'll be licensed in SeaTac, Washington, where our airport is. The SeaTac government wants to put the antenna on their city hall for this nonprofit group. So they're waiving all permits.
So it really doesn't take, and because it's low power, it's not like you need a tower. You don't need, this thing doesn't have to be 500 feet off the ground.
Right. It's more like a 6-foot stick on top of a building. So
Right.
There is some visual remediation, and it's appropriate for it to go through a review process just to make sure the neighbors are happy and everyone's safe and sound.
I got to figure out how I can run one out of the house here, Rob. That would be perfect. Don't know if my homeowners association would like it, but why not?
Yeah, and don't put it above your kid's bedroom. Yeah, it should be in an area that's zoned appropriately.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's move on from the kind of the terrestrial side a little bit, Todd. Unless you have more questions,
No.
It'd be great to talk a bit about the digital side and what those stations are trying to accomplish, and what and also about content too, about what they're typically doing, and what the distribution of the types of content in these stations is really all about, because it's local. So
right.
I'm just curious.
I think one of the big things to keep in mind is that these groups are in community institution building. So they're building new anchor institutions in their neighborhoods, and they act like a magnet that pulls people in. So to me, in a sense, the terrestrial signal is almost secondary. It's like it activates the space, just to use a that kind of term. It pulls in all these folks, and it also is a time-based art, if you will. So the show must go on. Something has to happen. And it makes these really creative, energetic community folks, it makes them, have to produce something. And so it's somewhat different than a dynamic with folks doing podcasts, unless they're doing podcasting in a community of people. So it also provides this community of folks to help folks work on their craft, and it also gives some folks access to tools and training and equipment that they might not have access to otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So does the
those are a few those are just a few of the components I think that are important. And it's not to say you can't do that with an online radio station. One of the applicants here, Hollow Earth Radio, has been doing that for 8 or 9 years. It's just and they have like 50 people who make radio every month at Hollow Earth Radio, and they have a robust online presence. They've been nominated for local awards. They get public agency grants. They're an exciting community institution, but even they were interested in getting an LPFM for the digital inclusion component. They were finding people in their neighborhood who didn't have computers or internet access, couldn't afford expensive data plans and such. So they wanted to also have an FM signal.
So are most of the stations then doing NPR style content? Is there music? Is it? I'm just trying to get a handle on what they're putting out over the air. What is the actual content?
As long as they're following FCC regulations when it comes to language, they can do just about anything they want. There are some situations. So the FCC had a point system for the applicants at that stage, where say there were 4 groups in a city that wanted the same frequency. They each got points for things such as how long they'd been an organization. Would they commit to airing 8 hours of local programming a day for the first 3 years? So then they would get more points if they were willing to guarantee localism, essentially. So those stations are required to do 8 hours of local programming. But that can also be some playlist that someone puts together of national music. As long as they have all the royalty rights covered, they can do that. It just has to originate in the area where it's licensed. But when it comes to NPR content, I mean, that's just, again, that gets at business model. If they can afford that, they can do that.
Right. It's interesting. So are most of these stations then that are coming online, are they programmed or are they manned? I mean, that's, is it a kind of a mix of both?
There are some stations that are doing automation at night. There's some groups that where producers do their audio at home and then send it in. But a lot of them really prioritize butts in seats in the studio.
Wow.
And doing that program right from the community space that they're creating.
Wow. Okay.
It just,
Go ahead.
the challenge with doing any type of, you think about the statement that you made that they've agreed to do 8 hours of local programming a day.
Sure.
That's easier said than done. That could be that could be a challenge.
Big time.
And also,
it's live programming too, right?
Yeah, it's live and
not necessarily.
Well,
no, not necessarily. It can be pre-recorded. Okay.
Yeah.
But still, 8 hours a day is a lot, and not only are they, so $60,000 for the equipment stuff. That's just like that's a rounding error for what a budget would need to be to have to be able to do one of these low power FM stations. If you're going to be running content through, this is not a cheap endeavor. So, I'm sure they're going to,
Right.
what is a typical budget for, do you have any operational budget? What are people spending a year? Are they spending $1 million, or are they, what's their cost to operate?
That's all based on what kind of organization they are and what their priorities are. A big variable would be the physical studio space. Can a group get that for free or very low cost? One of the applicants here is on city park property. So they're going to be getting their studio for, I think, like $1 a year.
Wow.
But other groups, Hollow Earth Radio, they put together a month-long concert series every year, and through that they're able to pull together the money. I think it's only like $12,000 a year for their storefront, their neighborhood storefront. So it just depends on the resources of your organization. So variable. But when it comes to content, what you're talking about here in Seattle, and I'm just talking a lot about Seattle. That's where I'm based, even though I work nationally. I try things out locally and then I share them out. So in Seattle, our Seattle Public Library, they have a lot of speakers come through. They're a large organization. They record those speakers. And we're talking with them about putting together broadcast releases that those folks can sign, and then the LPFMs can pull that content from a bank of local programming that's about their community still. We have a civic space, Town Hall Seattle. They're interested in a similar thing. And their lectures already run on some of our public stations, like our NPR station airs some of that content. So you can imagine there can be a lot of content generated by the specific neighborhood station, and that's what they want to prioritize. But there's a lot of other like civic arts and culture programming generated in a town like Seattle, where there's just all these community institutions that are behind the mission of these organizations and want to share their content.
Gotcha.
So I wanted to ask you, kind of, as you look at the low power FM stations and what they're doing, how do you see kind of like a correlation to what we've seen happen with like a KEXP type of thing, like the music station that's in Seattle that's run by the University of Washington partnership? I'm just kind of curious, do you see like a KEXP model being successful in the low power FM side as well? Is from a national basis as well as local? Can you see something like that happening?
When you're talking about a KEXP model, what part of their model are you talking about?
Well, it's the hybrid between being nationally successful from a streaming perspective, and then also being successful from a local broadcast perspective. Just curious.
Well, sure. Well, if you look at KEXP right now, their biggest numbers are on YouTube. So they recently opened, I think it was like an $11 million facility at Seattle Center. Seattle Center is the place where the Space Needle is, for folks not too familiar with Seattle. So their mission is about music discovery, and they've created this massive community space. I really encourage folks to go check it out online. I'm sure they've got plenty of pictures, kexp.org. Gosh, I could just go on about their facility there, but they've invested a lot of money in a TV studio and in a performance space. They've got a couple different performance spaces actually, but one's a really fancy recording studio. But I think one of the things you're getting at is the way KEXP has worked with all the talent in Seattle and the talent that comes through Seattle. And then they have their mission about music discovery, but they also have real consistency in their brand and their identity and the kind of programming they put out there. And any of these groups can do that. It just depends on their resources and how savvy they are online. But KEXP started well, they're now technically, I believe, owned by a Friends of KXP group, but they have a relationship
Okay.
with the University of Washington.
Yeah,
But they
that's right.
started off in the communications building at the University of Washington. Um, and they couldn't be heard out of that building, something like even just 20 25 years ago, something like that. Then they grew their power to reach Frat Row, which is just off campus, and then
Yep.
they were able to expand it so it reached more of the city, and that gave them even more of that sense of space. And they capitalized on just what's been going on artistically in this city. And they
Yeah.
just continued to hone their sound. So a group like Hollow Earth Radio, they could do something like that. They're already seen, in some spaces as like an even closer to the ground indie KXP, and folks at bigger stations do watch some of the talent that like some of the content that comes out of Hollow Earth, and then they can kind of move that up through the pipeline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think what I'm getting at is how successful they have been in their national reach with their podcasts and their live streaming,
Sure.
and trying to look at kind of low power FM, which is typically, my perception is that it's really trying to cater to the local community. But are they going to feel pressure to build audience, and thus it's going to push them into creating content that maybe straddles that line between being local and national?
Sure. Well, it's just so variable. It's based on the mission of each organization. But at the same time, a lot of them are focused just on their neighborhood. And gosh, there's just so many directions they can go in.
Yeah.
I think, when you have even a small group of committed, savvy people, they can do anything they want. But a big part of it is community relevance, and how much visibility they can have in whatever community they choose to have it in.
Well, one thing I think is a maybe segue here, talking about the tying the podcasting space, is that the challenge that podcasters have had doing local is that there's just not a big enough audience. It's just it's too micro. So if you have groups that are honing local content and building an audience, broadcast wise, I think there's huge opportunities down the road, and maybe even now, to take that broadcast content that that they're spending time creating, and then putting that in a digital feed that will reach beyond the neighborhood, and maybe to a whole region. So, Rob, I know that's kind of you've been hoping for local for a long time, but it just never seems to have materialized, right?
Yeah, I think that's the bigger question is could this be kind of the leading edge of a movement towards more local digital consumption, using the podcast distribution methodology, and I see these low power FM stations have the opportunity to kind of lead that, because it just feels like that the culture of low power FM is very compatible with the culture of podcasting, but yet this divide exists between local and national. Podcasting today is very national and multinational right now, but it just feels like its future does involve a significant piece in the local side, and low power FM is very focused on that. I don't know that I see commercial radio really leading that charge, though they have the opportunity to do it, but the culture of commercial radio just isn't that compatible with podcasting. But I see these low power FM stations, like the like the example that we just talked about, the KEXP folks, as being more of the model of what could be successful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with KXP, an important part, just to further overtly articulate this, is that they are not only a radio station, they've added video, of course, but they're a vibrant local arts institution.
Yep.
And that's something that I don't really know of corporate radio stations that employ community driven folks. Well, okay,
Yep.
wait, that's unfair.
That's
I know
true.
plenty of people in commercial media who are community minded, but their institutions don't tend to co-create community events down at a local art space.
Right.
They don't
That's
tend to broadcast from the block party. They don't tend to take the risk to invite emerging artists into the studio and see what happens. You're probably not going to see something like what happens at Hollow Earth Radio, where on a weekday night someone brings a pot of spaghetti down to the studio and they like a little dance party spontaneously erupts. That's not uncommon in a.
We lost her. She'll be back.
Oh, yeah. And she was making such a good point.
Yeah, she was.
Seems like it always happens, right? Like
yeah, good old Skype, and she was on
Well,
her cell phone.
Yeah, I think if she holds her phone horizontal, I think we'll get a wide angle shot.
There we go.
Oh, see you again.
Oh, we lost her again.
I hope she's not doing this off of her data plan. Yeah. So anyway, Todd, what's your thoughts on what you've heard so far?
Well, I'm just with digital. Here she. Okay.
All right, I think I have you again.
We were, and you were on such a roll too. Rob and I were. Rob was commenting on it. I think the thing that where I'm torn a little bit is that did these organizations find that streaming and digital was not enough?
I think there's something in there about how community coheres. That's when you get back to this concept of this terrestrial signal acting like an anchor point in the community and a magnet. And it's gotten all these folks excited about community radio. So if you're going to go with the community radio model, which tends to be free form and eclectic, there's something that's almost, people use the word magical about terrestrial radio and how excited a community can get about it. I've never seen this many people, and just like the number, and then different kinds of people, ages, walks of life, so excited about this freeform community-based media making.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I encourage organizations, even before they get on the air, to do on-demand content, independent of how they distribute it. I think they should be making content immediately. So one of our stations, Rainier Valley Radio, they've paired up with a local South End media organization, community media organization, the South Seattle Emerald, and some other like civically engaged folks. And they have a podcast called The Fifth Estate. So that's recorded at Rainier Valley Radio and then distributed. I'm encouraging folks to not just originate their own on-demand content, but bring in community partners to let them use the space and become part of that community. So doing that before you even get on the air, and then putting together your online stream, just in real time, and then start doing your archives 2 weeks back at a time. Just make sure you're okay with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and at that point you can have everything up and running, and then just flip the switch to turn on the antenna when that's ready. So then you've already built up your community-based organization, and you're going, and there's all this churn and activity happening. And the FM frequency is just an additional distribution method, and defines a sense of place. Rob, I think you might have the maps that give an example of just what the local stations look like. I can pull one up and show you as well. But they define, just a set of neighborhoods. Yeah. And again, when it comes to their business model, they're just going to have to make sure they're super relevant and do a mix of underwriting, individual giving, and grants. And then they also do have an opportunity to have some earned revenue streams. So if they want to rent out their studios, have their engineers record folks, or if they want to teach engineering or just journalism, they can do those kinds of things as well.
It's interesting. I think that the thing I would, I understand this, how this is working in Seattle, because you have density of bodies and density of you just have a massive amount of people. But how is this now then? Let's talk about the rural side. Where my mom lives, there's a very small town. You said that initially this was a lot of agricultural type groups and stuff was doing. Is that what you mostly find in rural areas, or?
I've seen several different models for that. There's a station, KPCN in Woodburn, Oregon, that got on the air 10 years ago. Actually, this month is their 10-year anniversary. And I'm really excited to go to that because in 2006, it was a radio barn raising in Woodburn that got me into Low Power FM. So that was an opportunity in the early 2000s, that earlier window. And that's a farm worker community. And they broadcast in Spanish, English, and then several indigenous languages. And they make it work. I can tell you more about that, but I just went to the Grassroots Radio Conference in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and that's a little town. It's got a little bit of, I'd say, an Austin feel about it, but it's a small resort town, and they have this amazing studio. It's in the front of a historic building that will. The owners of the building are also building out a brewery and pizza restaurant behind the studio. And that's just rad. But these are folks who are really involved in their arts and culture community. They're musicians, and they've gotten a lot of folks involved in making radio, and that's another example. So once you get an LPFM going, the costs are much smaller, and
Right.
you can make something work on such a smaller scale. So with this restaurant and brewery, they'll be able to float the money to buy, a new whatever,
Right.
CD player
Right,
in the
right, right,
studio
right.
if it breaks down.
Yeah, so they use the business to, yeah. Or
Yeah.
that's cool.
Goldendale, Washington, that's a really good example. It's a impoverished rural community with a lot of challenges, but they were able to get a grant from Puget Sound Energy, the local utility that got them on the air, and they work closely with the public library there. These stations, they're going to be pretty lucky in the first few years if they even have a station manager. And I'm actually encouraging them to prioritize a really good volunteer coordinator, project manager type, more than
Right.
even a station manager, and certainly not a program director. You need someone to have an eye on compliance, but
Are most of these groups, are they are they ranging from the sole person to a small group, or what is what's the head count? What's a typical head count for a low power FM station? I'm sure it's all over the map.
I heard, I'm trying to remember what the station was, but they have like over 100 and a half folks involved in their station already. Gosh, it just depends.
Yeah.
I hate to give you such an unclear answer.
Well, because I'm just wondering if it's if there's a dude like me in Boise that is doing a low power FM and running it out of his and of course that's what Pirate was doing before, but I just wonder if there's anyone out there that are just they're very, very tiny solo man groups. It just curious, and I
Oh, sure.
put you on the spot on this, but
Yeah. I think that kind of situation was more possible. Like that kind of thing happened in the early 2000s window. And, folks just like individual people, like I heard of one out on the Washington coast. It was a guy who's just kind of a hobbyist and he wanted to play, like 50s music or something like that. And he just, kind of did that out, I think it like out of his basement.
Right.
But in this 2013 application window, um, Low Power FM advocates worked with the FCC to come up with these
Community
these
guidelines.
regulations that really kind of force or prioritized applicants who would have semi-public spaces.
Right.
Yeah, just even regulations. I think there's one about like having a telephone that's accessible, things like that. This opportunity is really for organizations.
So did the frequencies basically get all gobbled up, or is there still opportunities for folks in other areas if they want to look into it to possibly do this at this point?
At this point, there's no additional Low Power FM window planned. There are advocates in this space that are like Michelle Bradley at RecNet, that you can find her online. She's advocating for LP 250, so Low Power FM 250. So that could extend the reach of some of these existing groups.
But let's.
But 250 watts? Is that what it would be?
Right.
But what if
Right.
what if there was in some town openings in that frequency, part of the 2013 initiative? Could they still get in, or is that window closed?
Closed.
Wow.
Closed.
That's sad.
Well, and an additionally sad thing is that there's no national entity that really robustly funded the outreach period for this. An engineer had said there were like 11,000 frequencies available.
Wow.
But only like 2,800 groups were able to apply. There were a lot of faith-based organizations that were able to get out the application
Makes sense.
opportunity, and they had funded engineers and the ability to get it done quickly. But a lot of these grassroots groups just kind of they were scrappy, and there's a lot I have to say about how this gets funded at the national level, when you're looking at structurally who's funding what. And even it comes down to the mission of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They recently tweaked their bylaws actually so they could funnel more money into digital, into podcasting. But you can make an argument that actually Low Power FM is more in keeping with their original mission.
Yep. Makes sense.
But that's a big thing to go into with what their funding philosophy is right now.
And I'm sure this Low Power 250 initiative probably has massive resistance by the license holders of the commercial folks. They don't want competition, so I'm sure they're resisting at all levels.
Yeah,
but can they actually resist it though if it's being done as an FCC thing? I guess they can lobby, right? They can lobby their congressmen and things like that to try and stop it, right?
Yeah, so the National Association of Broadcasters and NPR fought Low Power FM for years. That's it, they basically delayed this opportunity for a decade, and that's just a really regrettable thing that happened. But at this point, I'm finding individuals within full power NPR stations to be incredibly supportive. They're massively supportive and want to partner with groups here in Seattle. And at the national level, I've heard from NPR lobbyists, they're not really interested in fighting this anymore. When it comes to NAB, they're certainly putting on their materials that they will protect members from encroachment by Low Power FM. But again, the engineers working on this are professionals and they're skilled. They're working really carefully to make sure there's not actual interference. and we'll see how Low Power FM's doing in 5 years. What does shift in the media landscape when you have 1,500 new little anchor points, little communities of people making media, and they're allowed to experiment. One of the things, Rob, that you were talking about earlier, reminded me that it's important to say that because listener numbers, just sheer numbers, these groups aren't exactly dependent on that for their business model and for selling advertising. It's more important that they're relevant in their communities. Again, like a community arts group that is sustainable because the community is behind it. So you get to unlink that program director dynamic where that person needs to make decisions based on audience growth. So with Low Power FM, you can broadcast in multiple languages, and you don't have to worry about your dominant audience only speaking English. And so we're seeing that here with shows in Amharic, and there's a Somali American station in Minneapolis. I'm really excited about, and you can read about them in just do a Google search. There are a lot of opportunities here for really narrow programming
Right.
that makes a group more valuable in the community rather than less valuable, like if this was happening at a NPR station or at a corporate radio station.
So are any of these stations doing a digital signal, or is it all analog today?
I have not heard of a station that's invested in the digital equipment.
Okay. It's more expensive, I'm sure.
I wouldn't be encouraging them to do that.
Okay.
I think there's a big case against doing that. I think these groups should invest in their online presence and their streaming and podcasting, and not worry about the digital receivers. I wouldn't change my stance on that until I saw market research that shows that there's wide adoption there.
But one thing this does bring up, Rob, for me at least, in this discussion so far, is there is an opportunity here for podcasters that are doing just podcasting that are, if their content aligns with the community space or the community of Low Power FM, and if they have some in their communities, to get involved and to bring their talent in and create some local content. It's an interesting. So basically, that we've got this huge, massive podcasting community, which some folks want to make the jump to broadcast. So this might spell an opportunity. And I'm sure these stations are always, and you're not going to get paid. You're going to go in there as a volunteer, but if it even means you're on at 8 p.m. on a Saturday, I'm sure these stations are looking for people to come in and create content.
Yeah, and it's probably a lot
Big time.
It's probably a lot like a public access show that you might do. So it's the same type of thing, I would think. But I think though, Sabrina, could you kind of give us a little bit of an idea? I know a lot of the folks that are putting these stations together come from radio, right? A lot of them don't have much of a background on the digital side. I'm assuming.
Or is it
if
the opposite?
a podcaster came in there, they would need to think about their show that they would do more from the radio side and less from a pure podcasting perspective. I would imagine.
When looking at that, I think it's really interesting what PRX did with Radiotopia. So Public Radio Exchange created their podcasting collective, Radiotopia, so that they threw together folks with radio backgrounds with folks with podcasting only backgrounds.
Okay.
And they learned a lot with that, and they've been experimenting with with funding models. So there's a lot there. If you're interested, go dig into that. When it comes to who's doing what and their level of emphasis on online and on on podcasts, there's just all these different pockets of low power FM. One
Mhm.
thing, Rob, that might be informing your question was the workshop schedule at the Grassroots Radio Conference.
Oh, God.
Right, like when I sent that to you, you commented, there's not anyone looking at online here.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Mhm.
been kind of my why I wanted to reach out to you and reach out to this community was to, Todd and I, and there's a couple other folks in this space that want to encourage and share best practices in the podcasting space, and we just see that the low power FM side is such an opportunity and so compatible with the medium that I think both of us would love to do what we can to help share, the learnings that have been gained over many years of this medium being in existence, and then trying to combine that with the low power FM community and the more public radio oriented approach that exists right there. I think that there's a lot of very successful examples on how that can be done.
Yeah, I think that the more we can I think the more that we can bridge these different communities, the better. I think the more
Yeah.
that we think about this as an ecosystem, the better. And we can talk a lot about how we got to this point where there are these, these silos between what's going on in these different areas that you're talking about. But I'm always looking for folks who are looking at the bird's eye view of this as an ecosystem, and folks who are interested in connecting these pockets of activity.
Over the last 24 months, I've spent a lot of time. Well, not a lot of time. It's either stations get or stations don't. I've been talking to a lot of commercial radio stations, and we've onboarded a lot of commercial that is some starting to make original content, some folks repurposing with instruction current content that they get. And the case study I always like to share is the local community college or the local high school football championship team or whatever.
Right.
Those 10-minute interviews that traditional radio do during morning drive make fantastic local podcasts, and those radio stations are those that are listening are not just taking 3-hour drive and making three audio files and putting out as a podcast. So what we and sometimes these stations get it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they want to get it, but they don't want to put the resources at it. So I think low power FM would be like, I can't imagine. I'm sure the conversation would be completely the opposite. Be like, yes, let's do this. Let's go. Let's make this happen. Versus like, well, I'm gonna have to budget to have a person. These
Right.
are so. I think Rob's right. I think there's huge opportunity for content that's now being created in low power FM to be able to become viable content that could be, and here's even something more exciting. So, how many local low power FM stations do you have in Seattle?
7 within the city limits and like 15 along I-5 in Western Washington.
So, what percentage of those are faith based?
I'm not currently working with any faith-based organizations.
So, there's 15 that are non faith based in the Seattle area?
Yep.
So, just think about, Rob, think about this. Pool those 15 low power FM unique local content together, and you have
Build a network.
And you have one kick-ass local network.
Yeah.
And you have to do it together. See, I'm just giving a huge business model away.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
But
Sure.
still, that's how you crack the nut on this local content scheme.
That's definitely one way to do it.
Well, it's part of it, yeah.
Yeah. there are folks who are looking at that like throughout the Pacific Northwest, and there's a historic precedent of that with a Northwest Community Radio Network. Something that's important to a dynamic that I look out for is that I'm not being too prescriptive with groups. I try and identify models. I try and find exciting things that are happening and sharing them with other LPFMs, trying to build relationships. But we haven't talked about this, but I'm part of the philanthropic work of Brown Paper Tickets, and I think it's really important that I approach like the 15 I'm working with as a cohort rather than a network.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And they've been awesome. We've talked about group underwriting sales and sponsorship sales because, obviously we've got a huge population in Seattle that advertisers want to reach.
Yep.
So, but I want to be really careful about how we go about that. So, I like making sure that I'm giving lots of space and time for low power FM leaders to adopt these ideas and start putting them together. And when I see political will, I do what I can to support that effort.
Well,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, just so you understand where I'm coming from, is
Sure.
that content co-ops. Let's just use the word, not use the word network. Let's use the word co-op. Content
Sure.
co-ops could be force multipliers in that you take a little content from every network and maybe the best of, and you put that together. And what that really then does build is you could really, it really allows you then, Rob and I were talking about cross promotion. So you've got this cross promotion
Right.
ability, but at the same time, because of the low power, not everyone's going to be able to listen to all the stations in the city too. So
Sure.
so that
But
would be
digital makes that possible.
right.
Though.
Digital, yeah, removes that barrier. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's some interesting things we can learn about what's going on within the NPR community. That huge dynamic that they're struggling with, that the national brands, the national NPR shows, are they're making podcasts, and the member stations are really concerned about how that can eat into their local donor base. So there's that. But something that we've run into, like in the grassroots pockets of low power FM, that comes down to platform. There's archive.org. Some groups have used that. There's Radio for All. Public Radio Exchange is a marketplace, but then that's costs money to pull content down. And then Pacifica Radio has audio port, but that's about $500 a year to become part of that. So if you're looking, as we're trying to find what technology platform supports that content sharing, and we haven't found one yet. So if you guys can think about some non-proprietary open source platforms that also still get maintained and have robust technical support and are easy for community folks to navigate, I am all ears.
Yeah, I don't know that those exist.
Well,
they don't really exist.
The open source doesn't exist, but the commercial exists. So.
Right. So I mean, we just have this huge range when it comes to resources of these organizations.
Well, actually, I mean, on that topic, it's actually not expensive at all to host podcasts.
Yeah,
so
it's inexpensive.
And especially with these low power FM stations, they're not going to be pulling huge bandwidth numbers.
Right.
That's going to present an issue where it's going to be expensive for them to host their content.
Right.
So I think the opportunity is there for very, very low cost digital distribution for them.
And I think there's opportunities for, there are platforms to be able to build networks, and the actual commercial cost of those is not extraordinary. So especially when you're dealing with let's say if it was a co-op situation where you had 8, 9, 10 people working together, the budget line would be very minimal. I know that their budgets are tight anyway, but it would be a small budget line item.
Yeah, I think coordination is a big part of this, and sorting out those platforms and figuring out how to point people to them. That's part of the equation.
I'll send you an email to some stuff that actually I have, so that'll
I
help.
would love that. I'd love that.
Well, I mean, Todd's got a great plugin, the PowerPress plugin, and probably many of these low power FM sites are using WordPress probably for their websites.
Yeah.
There's some pretty non-functional things out there. So
are there? Okay.
So yeah, and the more I can point people to tools that work, I'm so into that. So please do reach out to me. I'm just Sabrina at brownpapertickets.com. If any of your viewers or listeners want to reach out.
Well, we are, believe it or not, we're at 90 minutes, Rob. So
it's funny how that happens.
It is, and Sabrina, I want to thank you for taking time to come on and get us. It makes I get the wheels in my head spinning. Anyway, very very informative, and thank you for coming on and sharing.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate that there's folks from your part of the podcast world that are interested in this, and you sound like you really get it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're geeks at heart, so that's what it boils down to, and we're all about creating content. And this is just, as I said in the beginning, Rob and I have, I know Rob especially. I can't take credit for this, but Rob has been, Rob, you've been talking about this local content for a long time, and I've been like, it isn't going to work if the audiences aren't big enough. But there is a way ahead, it looks like.
Yeah, think about audience.
Could
but
be.
It's also exciting.
I just think it's kind of a culture and community issue of bridging this current divide that I think does exist between radio, just terrestrial radio, and digital and podcasting, and trying to bring these communities together. And I know I've expressed to Sabrina that I want to get involved a little bit more in the low power FM community and be a resource there. And I know, Todd, you'd probably be very open to that as well, I'm sure, knowing you.
Sabrina, the next meeting you guys have where you all come together as a group there in Seattle, you guys need to bring Rob in and let him twist your ear a little bit. So,
well,
I think that based on this, we could talk another 2 hours on this. But
indeed we can. I'm looking forward to keeping in contact with you, Rob and Todd. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But everyone else, thanks for being here today on the New Media Show. We are going to be back with you next Saturday again. I will be home from Denver. And again, if you are in the Denver area and want to meet up, just drop me a line at geeknews@gmail.com or at geeknews on Twitter. Rob, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Oh, just on Twitter, at Rob Greenlee, and that's with 2 E's on the end, and robgreenlee.com, and the Spreaker Live show that I do every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, where I talk about podcasting topics.
Sabrina,
I don't do that here as well, but thank you, Sabrina, for joining us.
Yeah, and Sabrina, do you have a Twitter account?
I do. It's Brina, BRINASEA, Brina C.
Brina C. All right, easy to remember. All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week on the New Media Show. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Well, that was cool.
Yeah.
All right, YouTube. Bye-bye.